HARK! We are here. It is time for yet another episode of Regroup Phase. We've got a bunch of Shadows of the Galaxy preview reviews going on this week. We also had a stream from FFG. We'll cover over some of the deck lists that Xander, Joe, and Jeremy Zwern played as part of that stream. And we're going to have a fun time today. So let's get right into it. Our first preview is our first leader of the week, and this comes to us by way of the Unlimited FFG social accounts. She's an interesting leader. There's a couple of things we're going to talk about as we go through this preview, so let's just get right to it. We have here Qi'ra, I alone survived, our Vigilance Villainy rare leader. She is Underworld trait. Her ability is action, 1 resource, and exhaust the leader. Deal 2 damage to a friendly unit, then give it a shield token. She flips for 5 into a 0/8. She's number 002 out of 262 in SHD. Backside 5 cost. 0/8 Underworld trait Grit. When deployed, heal all damage from each unit. Then deal damage to each unit equal to half its remaining HP, rounded down. Qi'ra's like the reverse Grand Inquisitor. Rather than dealing damage to ready them and keep attacking, she's dealing damage to those units to be able to increase their grit values and also give them the shield token to protect them from the next packet of damage that's coming their way. It's an interesting strategy, especially if you do have a lot of those high health, low power grit units like the Scout Bike. But I think the most interesting aspect of this card is her flip when deployed. You're looking at her, she deploys as a 0/8, but technically she's actually deploying as a 4/4. And the reason why is that you heal all damage from each unit, and then you distribute damage to each unit equal to half its remaining HP. The idea behind Qi'ra is to bring your opponent's units into range of a big board wipe like Bombing Run, and or give a bunch of your units that are already on the board that are either close to death or are not in a position to be able to utilize their grit as much as they should be able to and increase their power with those grit abilities. So there's a lot of interesting stylization here for the way that she should play as a leader. She's not going to be a leader that I think flips exactly at 5 because you want that damage distribution to work in your favor and against your opponent. You don't want to be healing your opponent's units. You don't want to be dealing too much damage to your units when it comes to the flip. And ultimately, this is going to be one of the finesse leaders in Shadows of the Galaxy. I think her leader side is a little underwhelming, personally. Dealing 2 damage to give a unit a shield token is okay on those big bodied grit units that you want to have the extra damage and then keep them alive. But I think the backside, the unit side, is actually going to be the strongest piece within the kit as a whole, because you can essentially give all of those grit units just a ton of damage. If you have a first light on the board, which is a 4/7, that gains the extra damage from grit, you can then make it a 7/4 by dealing the 3 damage because it's half the remaining HP rounded down, and then it becomes a bigger threat than it was originally. So Qi'ra's whole balance is making sure that your units have the damage you need on them to have the grit attached to them. And Qi'ra is here because she alone survived, and she's here to play. Our next 2 previews come by way of strictly casual. 2 units, a Vigilance Villainy unit and an Aspectless unit. Let's check out the Vigilance Villainy unit first. We have Lom Pike, Dealer in Truths, a 4-cost Vigilance Villainy ground unit, 4 power, 6 health, Underworld. On attack, you may give a shield token to an enemy unit. If you do, give a shield token to a friendly unit. Smuggle, 5 Vigilance Villainy, a rare, number 32 out of 262 in SHD. Lom Pike here is an interesting card. It's that I'm going to help my opponent, but it actually helps me in the long run, being able to utilize those shield tokens to save your units from being damaged. And if you can just remove the opponent's unit anyway, regardless of what they have, through non-damage sources, that makes it even better, because what did you do? You attacked, gave your opponent a shielded unit, gave yourself a shielded unit, and then you go, cool, waylay it back to your hand, or we're just going to take it down because it's got 5 health or less. It gives you the opportunity to protect your most vulnerable units while giving a shield to one of your opponent's units that are irrelevant to your main strategy. This is actually probably going to be pretty interesting in something like the super event control deck, where you can remove those units by doing those things and protect your own with the shields. And obviously something that just defeats everything on the board like Super Laser Blast isn't going to protect you, but you can be protected from something like a bombing run or any other large damage packets that might be coming your way with a unit of this type. Smuggling in for 5 instead of 6 is kind of interesting. I know that Nerd Parker said on Twitter that there's got to be an explanation for the way that these are costed, and I would be interested to know what that explanation is. But right now, interesting way of getting this onto the board for 1 resource more than you normally would, and making it so that it's not something that costs you a card from your hand. Smuggle is going to be the most interesting mechanic in this set, because things that don't seem good for its costs might end up being insane because it doesn't cost you a card from your hand. But with all that said, Lom Pike is here to deal truths with shields. Strictly Casual's second preview this week is a recursion unit. So let's check it out. We have here Street Gang Recruiter, a 5-cost aspectless ground unit, 4 power, 4 health, Underworld. When played, you may return an Underworld card from your discard pile to your hand. This is a common, number 260 out of 262 in SHD. Street Gang Recruiter is a recursion with a body. A 5-cost 4/4 isn't great, but being able to get back an event or a unit that has the Underworld trait that's very important to your strategy is quite good, and meshes similarly with the way that Bounty Hunter Crew interacts, although that's 6 cost and 2 aspects. It's a 4/4 that recurs an event and ambushes. Being able to do the recursion thing to bring things back to your hand is quite good. It means that your opponent has to be aware of things that are in your discard pile pretty much at all times, and how those can interact with their board state. So cards from hand, cards from resource row for smuggle, and cards from discard pile with these types of recursion strategies are actually a very interesting combination of threats that opponents have to figure out how to deal with. Is this going to see a lot of competitive play? Who knows? A lot of people felt that Restock wasn't going to see a lot of play, and it does, but only in the top end control decks, and even then it works in certain matchups. But if you get that far in, you're basically racing against the clock to try to win your game to be able to progress to the next round. But here Street Gang Recruiter, I think, is going to be a much better option than that, because of the fact that it just returns it to your hand. You can play it, do whatever, and keep moving forward with this 4/4 body on the field. Should be interesting. Next up, we have 2 previews from an article posted on StarWarsUnlimited.com. Designer insight on construction with Shadows of the Galaxy, in addition to stuff that you can run with Spark of Rebellion. There's 2 cards previewed here. 1 card I really like, 1 card I really don't like. So let's start with the card I don't like. We have here Rivals Fall. This is a 6-cost Vigilance Tactic event. Defeat a unit. This is a common, number 79 out of 262 in SHD. Ryback, why don't you like it? We didn't need more removal like this. We don't need unrestricted removal that does this in this game. I understand it's a 6-cost, it's expensive, but being able to say, cool, my opponent deployed their leader on 6, I'll spend 6, remove it off the board. If this becomes popular enough, flipping your leader at all is basically just going to be untenable unless you flip on 4, and you're getting 2 rounds of availability and viability out of it. We've already seen those low-cost leaders knocked out by things like Takedown and Force Choke, or just exhausted down with things like No Good to Me Dead, and effectively removed from any sort of forward momentum. This has really good art. I like this scene a lot, but ultimately this is not a card that I think was necessary for this set or for this game. Enough with the card I don't like. Let's check out this card I do like. We have here Midnight Repairs. This is a 2-cost double vigilance tactic event. Heal up to 8 total damage from any number of units. Number 54 out of 262, an uncommon in SHD. Midnight Repairs is a really neat card because it just heals a bunch of damage. You want to be able to keep your units on the board, keep things that are being attacked down, and you need to make sure they survive. Whatever the case may be, it's double vigilance, so it's going to be expensive for anything that's not double vigilance. But being able to pay 2 to heal 8 total damage from any number of units that you have on the board is a fantastic card. Love this art of Quill and Mando fixing the Razor Crest, but ultimately it just comes down to a 2-cost heal 8. Go ham, right? I think that's a really fantastic card, and limiting it to double vigilance at least keeps the theme within vigilance, but not allowing literally every deck that wants to run vigilance to do it, because this probably is okay for 4, but is something that you really have to make sure is worth it to you to play in a deck if you need to heal those big-bodied units. On May 29th, which was a Wednesday, FFG brought to us an FFG Live featuring Shadows of the Galaxy gameplay with Xander, Joe, and Jeremy. We'll talk about the gameplay and some of the stuff on that stream a little bit later, but we got 2 previews, aggression cards. Let's start with this first one. We have here Bravado, a 5-cost aggression innate event. If you defeat an enemy unit this phase, this event costs 2 less to play. Ready a unit. This is an uncommon number 182 out of 262 in SHD. Bravado is the type of card that wants you to run more interaction in your aggression decks, which you can do with things like the vigilance aspect itself, or use your units to slam into your opponent's units to be able to continue to ready things. I don't think this is going to be something that's played often in something like Grand Inquisitor. I think this is probably going to be the finisher in a hyper-controlled deck that wants to defeat enemies that already has one of their big units on the board, whether that's the Darth Vader deck with Darth Vader, or the Vigilance decks as a whole with something like Count Dooku, which is only 5 power, or Avenger, which is a lot more. That'll be the thing that ends up being super combo-y with Bravado as a card. But ultimately, this is one of those, you're effectively trying to use your units to remove your opponent's units, and that level of control can work, but it's going to require a lot more effort in making sure that your stuff survives so it can be ready to be able to continue to use Bravado. You will have to eventually use an action to defeat a unit, use an action to Bravado, and then use an action to attack with that readied unit, which could work if you're on the my opponent's already taken the initiative step. But if they haven't, you have to work around to figure out what's going to be worthwhile to play this card. I think if this cost 3 less instead of 2 less, it'd be a lot better. But as of right now, it's a slightly better, but also slightly worse version of Keep Fighting. Next up, we have an interesting and slightly tricksy ground unit. We have here the Stolen Land Speeder. This is a 1-cost aggression ground unit, 3 power, 2 health, Underworld Vehicle Speeder. When played, if you played this unit from your hand, your opponent takes control of it. Bounty, if you own this unit, play it from your discard pile for free and give it an experience token. This is a rare number 161 out of 262 in SHD. This does combo slightly with Bravado because you do want to defeat the units that this is on your opponent's side of the board. So technically, if you defeat the Stolen Land Speeder, Bravado, bring the Stolen Land Speeder back with the Bounty. Bravado it, you could attack with the 4/3 the same turn that you gained control of it. But outside of those types of combo shenanigans, what this does is it places a unit on your opponent's side of the board that you want to defeat, and it has a Bounty. So this is decent for Bounty decks that allows this unit to come back to your side of the board at a higher power level than it was before. It is a combo that requires a little bit of a setup, but because this unit itself is only 1 cost, it's actually a really decent play to be able to get this back on your side of the board if you attack into it or just remove it with a little bit of damage. Because it does have a Bounty on it, it combos with the Bosk and Dengar combo. You can play the Dengar, or if you have a Dengar out, throw an upgrade onto the Stolen Land Speeder, ping it with the Dengar, and then ping it with Bosk's effect to be able to bring it back to your side of the field, and with whatever other Bounty comes onto it with the upgrade that you play, if it has an upgrade on it. There's a lot of combo potential in this and a lot of speed potential in this. I wouldn't be surprised if Bosk loaded up on 3 of these to target with bounties to get multiple extra effects based upon this coming back to you and getting the bounty on other cards. Our next 2 cards come by way of the Hobbyist Novice over on YouTube, link in the description below. These are the last 2 Bad Batch cards we were missing. One we knew because it's kind of obvious it's coming, and the other one we knew because of the art it has. So let's check out the obvious one first. It's another 5-cost unit. This is the Marauder, shuttling the Bad Batch, a 5-cost command heroism space unit, 4 power, 5 health, fringe vehicle transport. This has ambush. When played, choose a card in your discard pile. Put it into play as a resource if it shares a name with the unit you control. This is a rare number 102 out of 262 in SHD. The Marauder seems to be the final piece of the combo that works with both Hunter and Echo, being able to utilize Hunter's ability to pull a card from your resource pile if it has the same name as a unique unit on the board. Echo allows you to discard that unit to be able to put experience tokens on the unit that is named, and then the Marauder takes that card and puts it back into your discard pile when played. So if you have a couple of copies of Marauder that you can shift around, Marauder comes in, takes the discard, puts it down, Hunter brings it back another turn or even the same round, the Echo is able to put the experience tokens. It's a multi-card combo that has a lot of moving parts and does kind of fit the way that the Bad Batch does things, is that they have their plans and they work their plans, but there's a lot of other pieces that could go wrong around them that they try to work through. I think the Marauder is actually a really good unit, a 4-power ambusher that can take out most of the things that have 4 health without taking much damage back. And then again, you get the resource. It's not ready, so it's a pseudo ramp. It's more of a exhausted ramp that you'll be able to use in the next round, but it's still a good piece of tech to add to the Bad Batch build. The Marauder is here. It's pretty cool, and it gives you that combination cycle that we previously talked about that can be very strong. The second preview from the Hobbyist Novice is a very interesting event. We have here Choose Sides. We've seen this art before in the background of the FFG live streams. This is a 7-cost command plan event. Choose a friendly non-leader unit and an enemy non-leader unit. Exchange control of those units. This is a rare number 132 out of 262 in SHD. Very simple effect, but a complex execution. I choose one of my units, I choose one of your units, we swap. Done. Any upgrades come with, any other restrictions go with, so on and so forth. So you can use this to exchange a unit that you have that has a bounty on it and give it to your opponent so you can claim it. Dr. Evazan comes to mind for Choose Sides, although, again, I personally would never play that, so that's never actually going to happen. But another play that people have talked about is I'm just going to take your Avenger, which, let's cool our jets a little bit. That's a cool play, but you have to have units on the board in order to be able to exchange for the Avenger. And oftentimes when the Avenger comes down, you have no units. So Choose Sides is probably best for the late game of a mid-range deck that is able to keep units on the board, give away one of your cheap units to be able to take one of your opponent's more expensive or better units. And on top of that, you can give an exhausted unit and take your opponent's ready unit to be able to shift that tempo in your favor because they have less units that can attack and you have more units that can attack. This is much better than something like Change of Heart or Traitorous. Choose Sides is a permanent exchange of control. This could also be really good in something like Palpatine, where Palpatine can take a unit, use his own effect to get rid of something. You can play a cheap unit, choose sides to give your opponent the cheap unit, and then if you, on the next round, you can use his effect, or if you haven't used his effect yet, you can sacrifice your opponent's unit to basically keep it off the board no matter what, to get yourself the draw card and the damage. One of the few times I feel like Palpatine has something that's worth playing, and it's interesting, but again, 7 cost. This is going to be a chonker to play, but you have to make sure it's worth playing when it comes down. I think there's going to be a lot of people that get taken advantage of when it comes to choose sides, and there's going to be some people that are prepared to deal with this pretty much no matter what. Against aggro, this is basically worthless because all the units that you're going to be getting are little units that don't do anything. You could counter a K2SO or a Guerrilla Attack Pod or something like that, or rip an opponent's Millennium Falcon off their board, that you have to pay the recourse for that or the recoup for that. There's a lot of interesting situations. Choose Sides, I think, is a good card. It's definitely better than the other take control cards that exist in the game, but it is expensive. Next up, we have 2 previews from Wossy Plays over on YouTube. Link in the description below. We got 2 units here. Let's get started. We have here the man, the myth, the legend himself, the Marshal Raylan Givens, sorry, wrong show, Cobb Vamp, 3 cost command ground unit, 3 power, 2 health, fringe official. When defeated, search the top 10 cards of your deck for a unit that costs 2 or less and discard it. For this phase, you may play that card from your discard pile for free. This is a rare number 115 out of 262 in SHD. Starting off, this is a Mandalorian image with Book of Boba Fett text. We see him in the Mandalorian armor. I feel like it should have been more representative of that version of the character, but given that he gets defeated by Cad Bane in the Book of Boba Fett, spoilers for a year-plus-old show, but that does cause Freetown to join up with Boba Fett at the end of the Book of Boba Fett. That's where you get to see these different types of things. And this does actually work pretty well with Freetown backup. But the big thing for me is that I wish that this card would have been representative of this character rather than the situation that surrounded him. Cobb Vanth is definitely a character that deserves more than 3/2 on a 3 cost card. With that said, let's just ignore the fact that it's Cobb Vanth. Let's just say this is a New Republic Marshal, right? Being in command and not restricted to heroism, that means that he can be played in multiple decks. He is an official, which means he slots perfectly in with Emperor's Royal Guard. The when defeated text does actually give you some benefit into running him with Emperor Palpatine himself, which then the Royal Guard gets 2 bonuses based off of that. And there are a couple of 2-cost cards that are really good that you would be able to pull with the Marshal off the top card of the deck. You would top 10 cards. You could bring in your Crafty Smuggler. You could bring in a Battlefield Marine. You could bring in a Viper Probe Droid, depending on which aspects you run with your deck. There, like I said, Freetown Backup works really well with this card. There's a lot of different little meshy things that can work with the Marshal himself. And I think that this card has some value, but the analysis of it, of like cost and power and health, gets kind of wonky because while he does replace himself, he doesn't replace himself with something ready. It takes an additional action to do so. There's a lot of little pieces that require you to be more willing to give up the initiative to utilize this character's effect. And then on top of that, much like several other effects that work in this manner, this effect can be controlled by your opponent. They can just choose not to defeat it. If you run Cobb Vanth into a unit, then yes, you get that effect. But again, unless your when played effect is very powerful, such as Leia, which can exhaust a unit's already a resource, there's not too much utility when it comes to making sure that you can get multiple attacks. Something with ambush of a 2-cost, sure. That said, it's a good card. It's just underwhelming to me, with Cobb Vanth being one of my favorite characters in Star Wars. So being able to have this character in the game is really cool. The problem for me personally, maybe not necessarily you, but definitely me, is that this is not representative of the way that I feel Cobb Vanth should have been represented in the game. That said, the Marshal is a decent 3-cost card that requires players to, well, on both sides, to think about how they interact with him and what could be coming based upon that when defeated effect. Speaking of Season 2, Episode 1 of The Mandalorian, The Marshal, we have here Wossy Plays' second preview, and it's a big one. We have here Great Dragon, a 9-cost aggression ground unit, 10 power, 10 health, creature trait, overwhelm keyword. When an opponent plays a card, you may deal damage equal to that card's cost to their base or a ground unit they control. This is a legendary number 172 out of 262 in SHD. We're going to ignore the card itself for a moment and take a look at the art. I would like to say props to Leonardo here for putting in the little extra horns here. That was the one problem I had with the episode, was that the Krayt Dragon didn't really look like a Krayt Dragon. It looked like a Krayt Worm. But by putting this extra horn in here and making it look more dragony, it's really cool and representative of the way that people have seen Krayt Dragons for years before that one specific episode of The Mandalorian. Now, card itself, super expensive. It does slot right into aggression, but you have to survive long enough to be able to do so. So aggression command, being able to ramp up, getting this Krayt Dragon out earlier is something that's very interesting. 10-10. It's the Devastator, but on land. It also has overwhelm, so it's the Devastator, but on land. The biggest key piece of problematic play for this card is that anytime your opponent plays a card, this is not once per round. This is anytime your opponent plays a card, you can deal damage equal to that card's cost to your opponent's base or ground unit they control. There's no reason to ever not use this effect. Just throw the damage at your opponent's base. Even if there's no units on the board, you get to throw it at your opponent's base, and bare minimum, if they use one piece of removal to get this Krayt Dragon off the board, this trigger hits the resolution stack. The Krayt Dragon leaves the field, and then the Krayt Dragon's effect activates and resolves in order to be able to deal the damage of what they use to get it off the board. Your opponent spends 5 to vanquish it, cool, 5 damage to your base. Your opponent spends 4 to fell the dragon, cool, 4 damage to that unit. Your opponent spends 8 to super laser blast, cool, here's 8 damage at your base. Krayt Dragon's one of those, how do I get this off the board without killing myself type cards. And because he has overwhelm, that makes it even worse, because he's still pushing damage through on your opponent's units, and they have to figure out how they're going to be able to deal with this. This guy eats echo-based defenders for breakfast. 3 damage to it, 7 damage to your base. This card is absolutely nuts, and its effect is definitely representative of the fact that it is a legendary card. And we talked a little bit earlier about these damage type effects not being more than once per round. Krayt Dragon just says, you know what? We're going to let you do it as many times as you possibly want. There is play around because your opponent has to play cards to do this. So if they could effectively ignore the Krayt Dragon or keep him out of contention for killing you, then that effect isn't too much of an issue. But if you have to take it off the board, that Krayt Dragon's taking something with it, and that's really cool design. Next up, we have our second leader from FFG, Unlimited FFG Socials. It is not the leader we were expecting to see this week, but he is a badass nonetheless. We have here Cad Bane, he who needs no introduction, even though I just introduced him. Cunning, villainy, Underworld, bounty hunter. When you play an Underworld card, you may exhaust this leader. If you do, an opponent chooses a unit they control. Deal 1 damage to it. Epic action for 6 into a 2/8. This is a common, number 14 out of 262 in SHD. And he who needs no introduction is a 2/8 on his unit side with raid 2. And when you play an Underworld card, you may choose an opponent. They choose a unit they control, deal 2 damage to it. Use this ability only once each round. Cad Bane, fantastic card here. Being able to attack out as a 4/8 is incredible. You're not going to be able to do too much damage on the recourse if something attacks into it, but a 2/8, an 8 body, really good. 2 power, not as good. 4 power on the attack, much better, especially for 6. The main strategy for Cad Bane is effectively every single round, you're going to play an Underworld card, and that Underworld card is going to force your opponent to deal 1 damage to one of their units. Being able to capture your opponent's stronger units and use Cad Bane's effect to knock out the weaker units is going to put you in a position to gain your bounties and also remove your opponent's units off the board in a way that several other decks are not going to be able to do or keep up with. I think this leader is probably one of the best leaders we've seen so far in this set. And mind you, I love Rey, I love the Mandalorian. I think Gideon's a pretty good leader. I'm going to enjoy trying to play Hunter at least a little bit. But Cad Bane is the ultimate. This is the label of the set. Underworld. And because he himself is a bounty hunter, you can target him with the bounty hunter things that give him things like shields and protect him from damage, and he can just be a menace. The one downside is that I understand why they limited the unit side to once per round, but I don't think that was necessary. Sure, there are a lot of cheap Underworld cards, and you can recur them with a card that we've seen before, but at the same time, if your opponent doesn't have units on the board, you can't deal damage to them, and you have to pay the cost for it. So at most, you could probably get maybe 3 Underworld cards played to be able to do those damages, and I think that's fine. If Bosk can deal 2 damage as a unit from Spark of Rebellion based upon each event played with no cap, I don't think that Cad Bane should have been limited on his unit side. On his leader side, 100%, I'm fine with that. But beyond that, Underworld is here to play, and Cad Bane, here he goes blasting. Our next 2 previews come by way of the Outmaneuver team over on YouTube. Link in the description below. It's 2 Underworld cards, and these are actually pretty good ones. So let's get started. We have here Lady Proxima, White Worm Matriarch from the beginning of Solo, a Star Wars story. 1 cost, aspect agnostic, ground unit, 0 power, 4 health, Underworld trait. When you play another Underworld traded card, you may deal 1 damage to a base. This is an uncommon, number 255 out of 262 in SHD. I think this might actually be our first uncommon aspectless card, and the reason why that's relevant is because this is a very strong card compared to some of the other aspectless cards we've seen. I still think Mandalorian Warrior, one of the best aspectless cards we've seen. The last guy we saw earlier in this, it was called the Street Gang Recruiter. That's also a very strong card, especially for Underworld. There's going to be a lot of really interesting Underworld strategies for Limited, but Lady Proxima pushes herself into an actual viable spot for Premier / constructed gameplay. Because of the fact that she can go into any Underworld deck being aspectless and deals damage, Underworld is able to push that base race against other strategies that would also be trying to push base damage to outrace an opponent. And because this is a 1 cost, it's cheap to come out. It's got 4 health. She's got 4 health, so she's not going to be leaving the field anytime soon unless you really focus your resources against something like this, and you're overpaying for that pretty much every single time. She's really good. She's not going to be able to do any attacks, but that's not terrible because of the fact that that means you save 1 action per round because she doesn't have to attack. You just don't attack with her. She just sits there ready to go. Ping, 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 ping whenever you play another Underworld card. This is not limited to once per round, excuse me. So that's really good. And I think that this is going to see a lot of play in Underworld decks. The second preview from the Outmaneuver team is a space unit, and it goes with the leader that we previewed a little bit earlier. Let's check it out. We have here Xanadu Blood, Cad Bane's Reward. This is a 6 cost cunning villainy space unit, 4 power, 6 health, Underworld vehicle fighter, raid 2, much like Cad himself. When played and on attack, you may return another friendly, non-leader Underworld unit to its owner's hand. If you do, exhaust an enemy unit or resource. This is a rare number 191 out of 262 in SHD. This is the paired fighter, much like Fett's Fire Spray is with Boba Fett. This is the paired fighter with Cad Bane. It doesn't specifically call out Cad Bane by name other than the subtitle text, but it works very well with Cad's ability to be able to do damage for playing Underworld units or just cards in general. If you have an Underworld unit that's cheap that you can return with Xanadu Blood, you can disrupt your opponent's strategies, and then on the next round, you can play that Underworld unit to get the ping and do whatever else you need to do with Cad Bane, depending on where he is, if he's a unit or a leader on your side of the board. This is a great unit. It actually is better than Fett's Fire Spray on the attack because it does push out 6 attack. This, when played on attack ability, is going to be very relevant for making sure that you have the ability to proc your leaders and also disrupt your opponent's gameplay. Our next preview is yet another Underworld card, coming by way of the unlimited FFG social accounts. This is a very, very good card, a true Vader side grade / replacement, and it fits very well with the theme of Shadows of the Galaxy. We have here Maul, formerly Darth, technically Shadow Collective Visionary, 7 cost, command, villainy, ground unit, 7 power, 6 health, force and Underworld traits, ambush and overwhelm. On attack, you may choose another friendly Underworld unit. If you do, all combat damage that would be dealt to this unit during this attack is dealt to the chosen unit instead. He's a rare number 90 out of 262 in SHD. Maul has arrived to lead the Shadow Collective to true victory in Star Wars Unlimited without technically being a leader. There is one other piece of Maul art that we've seen that could potentially be a leader, but might not necessarily, depending on what they choose to do going forward. I do like that this card is in command. It means that you do have to branch out from Cunning to play the Underworld decks truly powerfully, and like we said before, this comes out at the same cost as Vader. Is a true Vader replacement. You don't get the extra unit onto the board from looking at the top 10 cards of the deck, but as a rare, it has the ability to shunt the damage that would be dealt to Maul during this attack to another unit to sacrifice that for either another effect or is something that you want to put damage onto anyway, regardless of the situation. And because this has ambush and overwhelm, you're dealing a lot of damage with 1 card for 7 resources that your opponent may or may not be expecting to come out at them. I expect to see this a lot in Underworld decks because he does have that keyword and he does mesh with the Underworld traits specifically. And on top of that, this is one of the stronger picks that you could take with Palpatine's Return, which we previewed 2 weeks ago. And this is an absolutely insane card, especially at rare. To have true competition with a legendary at a lower rarity is something that I was not expecting to see, but I'm very happy to see that Maul is here and ready to go. It'll be interesting to see if his proper saber, not Fallen Lightsaber, comes into play, or if he uses one of the old Inquisitor sabers. It'd be very interesting to see what they choose to do with Maul in the future and in this set. But this card is here. It is very good, and I'm very excited to see what he's going to be able to do in the game on arenas across Star Wars Unlimited. Next up, we have 2 previews coming by way of KTOD, link in the description below. These are both Underworld units and go nicely with the other theme that we have. Let's get to it. We have here first Synara San, loyal to Kragan, a 4 cost Vigilance Villainy ground unit, 3 power, 6 health, Underworld, Grit. So, you big butt, Grit goes right with that. While this unit is exhausted, she gains Bounty, deal 5 damage to a base. This is an uncommon number 33 out of 262 in SHD. This is a character from Star Wars Resistance. Unfortunately, the content that I'm least familiar with when it comes to mainline Star Wars stuff, I really should actually get into and finish that. This card and the next card are both Resistance characters from what's known as the Warbird Gang. Interesting Underworld character, 4 cost 3/6 is pretty good. We do have Grit, which means that it goes up depending on how much damage she has. The interesting aspect of this is that this character really wants to be the last unit you attack with on any given turn, or you have to be able to eliminate her before she becomes exhausted or protect her in some form or fashion, because while exhausted, she gains Bounty, deal 5 damage to a base. So if your opponent's able to defeat this, even if it's just a small thing or just a piece of removal, dealing 5 damage to a base is actually quite huge. So while the hyper control play, all the removal events is very relevant to the meta, I don't believe this character will be. Outside of that though, She fits with Qi'ra. She fits with the grit style of gameplay. She is 3 power, so she fits a Grand Inquisitor and Keep Fighting. There's a lot of different interesting spaces you can put Sonara in, but I think that exhausted clause of this card is going to make her very risky to play. Not as risky as Evazan, but definitely still risky enough to make you really think if this is something you want to put in your deck. The second preview is a villainy-only unit that goes in a bunch of different Underworld decks and does a specific thing that benefits you. We have here Kragan Gore, Warbird Captain, a 6-cost villainy ground unit, 6 power, 6 health, Underworld trait. When an enemy unit attacks your base, give a shield token to a friendly unit in the same arena as the attacker. This is a rare number 241 out of 262 in SHD. Average 6-cost character with 6 power and 6 health. Underworld trait is very good, very relevant for this set. This actually might be really good in limited because it has a good body for the fact that it is a 6-card cost. It's a rare, so it's not going to come up all that often, but if you get it, it's probably worth running if you're running villainy. The main effect of this character is when your opponent is doing the thing that wins them the game, which is attacking your base, you can give a shield token to a friendly unit in the same arena as that attacker. So you have to make sure you have units in both arenas to be able to take advantage of this. It is not once per round, which is very interesting. It means that the developers decided that damaging with effects like this more than once per round was not okay, but giving yourself protection with effects like this more than once per round is okay, leading more towards games lasting longer than games being quicker. I'm not necessarily sure I agree with that, especially with some of the characters only dealing like 1 or 2 points of damage based upon an effect that could either be just as hard as this to get off or harder. Needless to say, pick up your shields, get them onto your units if your opponent's attacking your base, and then use those shielded units to take out your opponent's units without taking too much damage back yourself. Again, 6 cost, 6/6, not a terrible stat line. It is going to do some work. Not so easily removable as some other units that do have lower health, but it also doesn't immediately mix with any other very specific strategy. It's kind of just a catch-all plug-and-play card, which could do work as long as your opponent is attacking your base. Next up, we have 3 cards previewed at UKGE over in Great Britain. I almost made a critical error. These are very interesting cards. They're kind of generic-ish, but there's one card that's really neat for what I potentially might want to be doing going forward. But we're going to take a look at these and see how cool they are, starting with an upgrade. We have here Bounty Hunter's Quarry. We saw this art earlier. It was just the Millennium Falcon, but we did get the expanded art piece later that did include Slave 1, Boba Fett chasing Han and the Falcon towards Lando system. 1 cost command upgrade. Attached unit gains bounty. Search the top 5 cards of your deck, or 10 cards instead if the unit is unique. For a unit that costs 3 or less, and put it into play free. +0/+0, Bounty Hunter's Quarry, Bounty Condition, an uncommon number 123 out of 262 in SHD. So this is a mini recruit effect, but it puts the unit into play, or a Maxi Vader effect that doesn't limit it to villainy specifically if the opposing unit that's been bountied is a unique unit. This will be very interesting to see how bounty decks want to approach using this. We know that Bosk is very heavy in aggression and might slide into something like Cunning for one style of gameplay, but with something like this could slide into command, especially with running things like resupply and price on their head, Bounty Hunter's Quarry. If you double this, you could effectively search the top 20 cards of your deck for 2-3 cost or less, which is kind of insane. But it'll be very interesting to see how this balances with things like removal packages, which are also important for decks, and how many upgrades people are going to run if they do decide to run a full suite of a bunch of 3-ofs of upgrades, or if players choose to run a couple of 2-ofs, or just a package of 5 bounty upgrades all at 1-ofs, which I think will be a very interesting deck building choice, and is part of the set 1 has obvious power and set 2 is more tricksy power, and you really have to think about what you're doing. And this is one of those cards that makes you think, how many copies should I play of this? How reliably can I get this effect off? And will what I'm getting off the top of my deck put me in a position to win this game? The next card from UKGE is one of the cards that I'm actually really excited about in terms of what it's capable of doing for a deck that I'm going to be playing going forward. We have here Covert Strength, a 1-cost vigilance tactic event. Heal 2 damage from a unit and give it an experience token. You can also smuggle this for 3 in a vigilance. This is a common, number 75 out of 262, I believe, in SHD. On the picture, we see the Armorer just absolutely smashing the crap out of Remnant Stormtroopers, much like we saw her do in The Mandalorian Season 1. Very interesting card here because it does protect you. It does protect one of your units from the damage that they've already taken by taking it off, especially if they have a larger health pool to draw from, and then you throw an experience token onto it. So if you have a Mandalorian that gets an effect based upon having an upgrade, you can heal the damage, give it an experience token, bada boom ba, right? You also don't necessarily need to heal damage to use this card. You do as much as you can. So if the card doesn't have 2 damage on it, you can still, for 1 cost, give it an experience token. If that 1 additional power for 1 cost pushes you through to the win, you absolutely use this. I'm very curious to see, once the full set is out, how the starter deck for the Mandalorian will shift from what it is presented in the starter deck to a larger competitive deck archetype with all of the cards from set 1 and set 2. I think this might actually either be a very interesting mainboard presence or definitely a sideboard presence if you know that your opponent isn't going to be able to deal with most of your units in a single shot and have to do piles of damage in order to be able to eliminate your board presence. Covert Strength, smashy, smashy hammer. Our last UKGE preview is a legendary card that is absolutely bonkers. It's just bonkers. We have here Rule with Respect. This is a 4-cost command heroism plan event. So goes right into Boba, a command heroism. A friendly unit captures each enemy non-leader unit that attacks your base this phase. This is a legendary, number 106 out of 262 in SHD. Rule with Respect. Somebody I think on Reddit put this pretty well. It's a reverse medal ceremony. Rather than being worried about what you attack with, you're worried about what your opponent attacks with. And if this is your last thing that you can do in any given turn, if you set it up so that way you can do that, you could, and your opponent attacks you with their entire board, I'd say 2-3 units, you can capture all of that onto one of your biggest units and be like, cool, now I have the board presence and you've got nothing going into the next round. This is a very interesting card. It's another one of those very carefully targeted niche abilities that's going to require you to be very careful with the way you manage your board and the way that your opponent manages their board. If the opponent sees this coming, they might not attack with everything, or they might set up a situation where you have no units on the board in order to be able to use this card on, because you still need at least 1 unit on the board in order to capture all of the stuff your opponent's playing. With that said, very strong card. This has the potential to blow out an opponent that basically the round after it comes down, if that opponent doesn't have any way of dealing with the unit that has been captured, especially if that unit that's holding all of the units is a leader, since leaders are relatively difficult to deal with 1-to-1 removal, except Rivals Fall, which just kills the game, right? So, Rule with Respect, very interesting card. It'll be interesting to see if this becomes one of the higher played legendaries or is seen more like Black One and Force Lightning, where it's very niche in its use. Our last preview that we will be covering this week comes from Unlimited FFG. It is the Monday morning Star Wars Unlimited spoiler. It's a very interesting card. Let's check it out. We have here Tarfful, Kashyyyk Chieftain, 7-cost heroism ground unit, 3 power, 9 health, Wookiee, restore 2 when a friendly Wookiee unit is dealt combat damage and isn't defeated. That unit deals that much damage to an enemy ground unit. The rare, number 250 out of 262 in SHD. We got another heroism Wookiee that goes really well with some of the other ones we have. Gentle Giant, Chewie leader. I'm sure in the next set we'll get a couple more Wookiees because it is more Republic based than this current set is. But with Tarfful here, he's got a big body, a small amount of attack, but he is restoring, so he is at least protecting you from damage by removing some of the damage off of your own base. And when your Wookiees are attacked, say your Chewie Sentinel, you can deal some damage back so long as your Sentinel isn't defeated. And if you attack into something else, again, so long as your Wookiee isn't defeated, you can either use the damage to finish that unit off or deal damage to another unit to clear it off the board. Very interesting set here. I'm very excited to see what Wookiees can do when they're a full fleshed out deck with a lot of Wookiee traded units. But for right now, we've only got 3 units plus a leader. It's a small sub theme that could be interesting in a deck, but Wookiees, they just take damage and keep punching. We have Black Chrysanthemum as well, who is unfortunately an aggression villainy card, but off aspect, who knows what you're going to do. Very interesting card. Very excited to see more Wookiees, man. They're just cool. On May 26th, FFG hosted an FFG Live talking about Shadows of the Galaxy deck building and gameplay. We had 3 games going on between the 3 hosts of the stream, Xander Tabler, Joe O'Neill, Jeremy Zwern. Fun sets of games there. We have all 3 of the deck lists we'll go over here. Some were running new leaders, some were running old leaders, and with a lot of really cool things here. So we're going to go through these deck lists one by one, check out some of the unique choices. So without any further ado, our first deck comes by way of Joe O'Neill running Kylo Ren, Capital City, Aggression, Villainy, Vigilance. Kylo Ren's here. You can't really see him because of my head, but who cares? Very interesting deck style here. This is mainly focused on upgrades. There were a couple of new additions from Shadows of the Galaxy, but a lot of this is still mainly the big power cards from Spark of Rebellion. So we do have 3 Guardian of the Wills, 3 Dr. Pershing, 3 Regional Governor, 3 Pike Sentinel, 3 TIE Silencer, 3 Migs Mayfeld, 3 Seventh Sister. Notice the big gap here in costs. 3 Count Dooku, 3 Resilient, 3 Electro Staff, 3 Mandalorian Armor, 1 Vader Saber, 3 Fallen Lightsaber, 3 Moment of Peace, 2 It Binds All Things, 3 Force Throw, 2 Power of the Dark Side, and 3 Bravado. This is a very interesting deck list. One of the reasons why Joe specifically said there are any 3 or 4 drops here in terms of units is because Kylo Ren is covering that gap, plus also the 1s, 2s, and 3 drops in terms of upgrades in the deck. So that's why the top end is a 7, but Kylo's out there and is going to be gaining a lot of power from these upgrades, the lightsabers, the Electro Staff. Very interesting style of deck here. A small amount of control, opting to use the units themselves as the control for knocking off the opponent's plays in the game itself. That was the strategy. Joe specifically stated that he's the big upgrades guy. He advises that traits are something important to look at with upgrades, Mandalorian being a big one. Force is another one. We already knew from the first set Force was a very important upgrade trait because of the lightsabers and because of some of the events that we've seen that do mesh with those. But also, Mandalorian is super important. New to this set, you get things like Mandalorian Armor, you get things like Foundling, which give things Mandalorian. Mandalorians gain extra bonuses based upon the upgrades that they have. One of the big things about deck building for this style of gameplay is you have to decide where you're going to be replacing cards with upgrades. And one of the things Joe said is, depends on where you want your upgrades to go. If you want your upgrades to go on your units, you're probably going to be removing units from your deck in the higher end of your cost curve, and making sure that you have plenty of low cost units that can get those benefits from the upgrades and be stronger than their initial values showcase. If they're going on your leaders, you can kind of mix and match based upon where you want it. So that's why we see there's a big grip of low cost here, but not as many high cost, and definitely a big gap in the center here in terms of the curve. But that's not necessarily a bad thing because Kylo Ren does cover that. And with all these upgrades, he can be a menace so long as you keep the cards in hand low. That's effectively the upgrade matters style. That's what Joe decided to bring to the table. Let's take a quick look at what Jeremy brought to the table. Jeremy also running Aggression, Villainy, Vigilance on boss. Again, you can't see it, but that's the boss leader. Opting for Dagobah Swamp, but Jay-Z decided to run a Bounty Matters deck. Also upgrades, but technically it's opposing upgrades in this list. So we have 2 Dengar, 2 Stolen Landspeeder. That was the card that Jay-Z brought to the table to preview for that week, and it's obviously a very interesting card as we went over it earlier. 3 Inferno 4, 3 Pike Sentinel, 3 TIE Silencer, 3 Punishing 1, 3 Disabling Fang Fighter, 2 Client, 3 Lom Pike, 3 Jango Fett, 2 Chrysanthemum, 3 Ruthless Raider, 2 Emperor Palpatine, 3 guild targets, 3 public enemies, 3 top targets, and 3 Power of the Dark Side. So much how Joe removed a lot of the events that remove units off the board and decided to go with unit control as his option for removal, Jeremy Zwern decided to go the same way, replacing most of his removal events outside of Power of the Dark Side, very strong card, opting to go for the same unit removal strategy by attacking with units or using your unit's effects to be able to ping things, get the bounties, and do extra damage with things like Jango Fett and Chrysanthemum, pulling out 9 bounty cards plus the Client, which also puts a non-upgrade bounty on an opposing unit, very heavy into bounties to make sure that you can get those bonuses, you can get those effects, and then throwing 2 bounties on the opposing side of the field, Stolen Landspeeder gives that value there. This is more of a mid-range deck as Jeremy specifically described it. And then the last deck we're going to take a look at here is Xander. Xander opting to stick with Han Solo, going with Catacombs of Cadera, spending more of his set 2 budget in the main deck rather than a leader. So we have here 3 Spec Force Soldiers, 3 Reckless Gunslingers, 3 Hotshot DL44 blasters, 1 Sabine Wren, 3 Ketsu Ono, 3 Green Squadron A-Wing, 3 Bamboozle, 3 Leia Organa, 3 Night Owl Skirmisher, 3 Millennium Falcon, 3 For a Cause I Believe In, 2 K2SOs, 3 Poe Damerons, 3 Zori Bliss, 2 Black Ones, 1 Wrecker, 3 Millennium Falcon at the 6 cost, 2 Han Solos, 2 Fennec Shans, and 2 Mace Windu's. The idea and goal of this deck specifically is to make it so that the cards in hand don't necessarily matter as much as they normally would. Han Solo can continue to discard cards or put cards down because you're going to be smuggling things out based upon their costs. And you do have a lot of really good smuggle targets: Reckless Gunslinger, Hotshot, Night Owl, Millennium Falcon, Zori Bliss herself, lots of different things that you could end up doing with your smuggle. And I will absolutely say this deck surprised the heck out of me. Xander is a great player, no shade to him whatsoever. He knows how it is, but the fact that this deck did what it did was very surprising to me and very interesting, because this is a fun build that doesn't seem like it's going to be overly oppressive against the opponent like some of the other decks we've seen so far with set 1. With these 3 different decks that they had in play, they went through 3 games. It was Joe versus Jeremy first, Xander versus Jeremy second, and then Xander versus Joe third. Please go check out the live stream, link in the description below. These were excellent games. They had a lot of fun, some really cool play patterns with each of the decks, and you can kind of get an idea of how these decks run with these cards. One of the big things Joe specifically said about deck building in Shadows of the Galaxy is just try stuff. And I 100% agree with this. Try stuff. Don't worry about winning or losing. See what works. See what doesn't work. If it does work, you keep it. If it doesn't work, you get rid of it and do something new. And that's really how playtesting works as a whole when it comes to gameplay in Star Wars Unlimited. Lots of fun stuff there. Smuggle is a very interesting mechanic. As we know, Jeremy also encourages utilizing Smuggle because what's the worst thing that can happen? You just resource it and it might come up later. Everybody has extra slots in their deck that they don't really know what to do with, so they either run cards that are not as good for their deck, don't have a main goal, or things that should be sideboard tech but have to be run main board. That's the live stream. Super fun there. And that's it. Yeah. And that is all she wrote this week. We are done. So many previews to go over, but so much fun stuff coming to the game with Shadows of the Galaxy. We are, I believe, officially at more than halfway. We're going to check the Shadows of the Galaxy previews here. Yes, we are more than halfway, 145 out of 262 total in SHD. So we're cruising on here to the release of Set 2 Shadows of the Galaxy, July 12th. And that's all we have for today. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining me. Remember to like, comment, subscribe to this channel, do all the lovely Star Wars Unlimited things here and things that make YouTube happy, so that way you can keep seeing these videos. Thank you very much, everybody, for your support. If you wish to continue, you know how to do so. We got everything going on everywhere. Follow me on all my social medias at RybackStun. Looking forward to presenting you some more videos. Looking forward to getting into the heart, the meat and potatoes of Shadows of the Galaxy. And with that, I will see you in the stars.